Welcome to the webinar for Engaging Diverse Populations in Evaluation. This is sponsored by the National Institute for Mathematical and Biological Synthesis and the National Institute for STEM Evaluation and Research, both based at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. This webinar is supported by the National Science Foundation through grants to the University of Tennessee. And I'm very happy to be here as your host for this event. My name is Louis Gross. I'm the director of the National Institute for Mathematical and Biological Synthesis. I'm also a professor of ecology and evolutionary biology and mathematics here at the University of Tennessee. This presentation is supported by the National Science Foundation. It is supported through the Includes project, which is a major project, one of the big 10 ideas of the National Science Foundation to broaden participation in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Our primary audience for this are principal investigators for Includes projects and those planning to apply either for the current round of applications that are open or for the alliance calls. The next alliance call is due later this year. The information that we're presenting could also be of interest to any person in STEM education wishing to learn more about cultural competency and engaging diverse populations in the process of evaluation. So this is the way that you can interact with us today. This is your basic Zoom webinar screen. If you have any questions or concerns or comments, you will click on the chat button that I just highlighted in red above. That will open a chat window. And in that chat window, you can decide whether the question that you're posting is visible to all participants or just to us on the panel. You can decide that. Then you simply type your question in the bottom where it says type here. And your messages will appear in the chat window. If it's just the panelists, then those of us who are on the panel will be able to see it and not anyone else. The webinar will last approximately 30 minutes, and then we'll be happy to address your questions and comments at the end. So your presenters today are two superb individuals with excellent credentials in this area. Pam Bishop has her PhD in evaluation and is the director of the National Institute for STEM Evaluation and Research. She oversees the external evaluation of a wide array of post-secondary STEM education and research projects, including many focused on broadening participation. She's also the associate director here at the National Institute for Mathematical and Biological Synthesis, charged with dealing with STEM evaluation, where she has developed a center-scale model for evaluating the processes and impacts of both the research and education and the outreach activities of the center. Kevin Kidder is an evaluation associate with the National Institute for STEM Evaluation and Research. Kevin has an extensive knowledge and experience in program evaluation with a specialization in mixed methods analysis and a very strong statistical background to go along with that. He leads, for example, here the evaluation of a major NSF-supported project on biology education. It's called CUBES, Quantitative Undergraduate Biology Education and Synthesis. So you can go to cubeshub.org to see about them. Kevin is also actively engaged at the University of Tennessee in a number of groups and organizations aimed at providing resources for underrepresented groups, such as the Commission for LGBT People. Really appreciate your willingness to do this. I'm going to pass this on to Pam Bishop, who will start off.
All right. Well, thank you, Lou, and thank you all for being here with us today. We're excited to have the opportunity to talk with you about how to engage diverse populations in broadening participation programs like NSF Includes, with the hope that you can take this information and apply it to your STEM education projects. So I'll quickly go over our agenda for today. And while most of you may be familiar with NSF Includes, we'll start with a really quick overview for those of you who are new or perhaps need a quick refresher. Then we're going to move on to the engaging diverse populations piece. This is where Kevin is going to walk us through the definition of culture, and he'll give us an overview of cultural competency. And then he'll walk us through some essential practices for achieving cultural competency in evaluation. At the end of the presentation, we're going to take some time to respond to your questions and comments. And finally, we're going to end by providing you with some information about where you can learn more. So I'm going to go ahead and get started by providing a quick overview of the NSF Includes program. So INCLUDE stands for Inclusion Across the Nation of Communities of Learners of Underrepresented Discoverers in Engineering and Science. It's a comprehensive national initiative designed to enhance U.S. leadership in STEM fields, which is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and to lead to discoveries and innovations focused on NSF's commitment to diversity, inclusion, and broadening participation in these fields. INCLUDES is interested in promoting novel approaches to broadening participation by supporting and building collaborative infrastructures that are going to bring people and organizations together who might be working on similar problems from different angles. INCLUDES has 3 essential components. First, Design and Development Launch Pilots, or DDLPs, are seed projects that are meant to lay the foundation for scaling up into broader partnerships. There are currently 70 DDLPs funded through the program, each with an aim to broaden participation in a STEM field or fields through experimenting with various change strategies. The hub will be the backbone of support for the program, serving to coordinate communication, alignment of activities, and promote the vision and strategy for the program. Hub solicitations were accepted in November of 2017, and the award is expected to be announced in the next few months. Finally, the third component will be the alliances. The program solicitation 18-529 has recently closed on April 4th, 2018, although we expect there are going to be more. And these projects are going to build on the activities of the DDLPs to leverage the strategies that have shown promise to develop multi-stakeholder partnerships. And they have an aim to build a network based on this foundation of collaborative infrastructure. And so how this fits into what we're going to discuss today is that one aspect of any successful broadening participation STEM education program should be understanding the cultural identities of your project stakeholders. And now Kevin is going to discuss some essential practices for engaging diverse populations in STEM education program evaluations.
Thank you, Pam. I'm pleased to share with you all today some key elements of engaging diverse populations in evaluation. So how does one even begin this process? First, we will begin by defining culture and cultural competency. This will allow us to better understand the populations we work with and how culture plays a prominent role in the interactions with participants, as well as the techniques and ways we will evaluate these programs. Next, we will provide you with a toolkit of best practices to use in interacting with and evaluating diverse populations. So what is culture anyways? In order to delve deeper into cultural competency and understanding how to engage diverse populations in evaluation, we must first understand what culture is. The American Evaluation Association says that culture can be defined as the shared experiences of people, including their languages, values, customs, beliefs, and more. It also includes worldviews, ways of knowing, and ways of communicating. Culturally significant factors encompass, but are not limited to, race and ethnicity, religion, social class, language, disability, sexual orientation, age, and gender. Contextual dimensions such as geographic region and socioeconomic circumstances are also essential to shaping culture. This diagram shows the overarching segments that make up a person's culture. Culture is dynamic, fluid, and reciprocal. It also shapes the behaviors and worldviews of its members, and in turn, culture is shaped by the behavior, attitudes, and worldview of its members. Some elements of culture are passed on from generation to generation, but culture also changes from one generation to the next. As you can see, There are two main invisible causes comprising culture. The first is fundamental beliefs and assumptions. Beliefs and assumptions are convictions that we generally hold to be true, even without actual proof or evidence. Values and attitudes comprise the second invisible cause. These are learned ways of responding to people and situations based on the underlying assumptions and beliefs. These are invisible causes that can be passed on from generation to generation. There are also two visible signs that are modeled in the diagram. The first is behaviors. Behavior is a manifestation of one's underlying attitudes and beliefs. The second is environment, which is the physical place where all of the other aspects take place. Now that we have a brief understanding of what culture is, we can begin to understand how this can affect our participants and how to be culturally competent. One of the American Evaluation Association guiding principles states that to ensure recognition, accurate interpretation, and respect for diversity, evaluators should ensure that the members of the evaluation team collectively demonstrate cultural competence. In order to make concerted efforts to be culturally competent, here are a few best practices to follow. Awareness of self. Be aware of your own biases that you may have and your own beliefs. Reflection on one's own cultural position. It is important to understand, as evaluators, about our own culture and how that may impact our work and interactions with stakeholders. Awareness of others' positions. Culturally competent evaluators refrain from assuming they fully understand the perspectives of stakeholders whose backgrounds differ from their own. However, it is imperative to try to understand where the participants are coming from and the experiences that have led them to where they are. And finally, the ability to interact genuinely and respectfully with others. This means treating all stakeholders in a polite manner in all interactions. Sengupta and colleagues describe cultural competence in an evaluation as a systematic, responsive inquiry that is actively cognizant, understanding, and appreciative of the cultural context in which the evaluation takes place. So why is this important in our work? First, cultural competence is an ethical imperative. Culturally competent evaluation emerges from an ethical commitment to fairness and equality for stakeholders. Second, validity demands cultural competence. Culturally competent evaluators work to minimize error grounded in cultural bias, stereotypes, and lack of shared worldviews. And lastly, theories are inherently cultural. Evaluation is steeped in theories. Evaluation theories, social science theories, program theories, and theories of change. Theories come from academic research, practice experience, and community conversations. And theories shape our understandings of culture and are themselves shaped by cultural values and perspectives. Next, we're going to propose and discuss some essential practices in evaluation. Evaluators, especially ones working with diverse populations aimed at broadening participation, must acknowledge and be cognizant of the complex nature of culture and the important role it has on shaping our students in the way they think and behave. Some of the factors that comprise an individual's cultural identity are modeled here. These factors include socioeconomic status, which is a measure of an individual's economic and social position in relation to others based on income, education, and occupation. Racial and ethnic identity. Geopolitical and territorial identity, which takes into account where a person lives and also where the person comes from geographically and how location influences political ideology. Religious affiliation. The language or languages that the participants use. The gender identity of the individual, which should not be assumed. And other factors such as sexual orientation and age. The next essential practice is recognizing the dynamics of power. Evaluators must be aware of the power dynamics that are in place, especially in academia, and how this impacts our students, the faculty, and our evaluation work. The American Evaluation Association tells us that culturally competent evaluators work to avoid reinforcing cultural stereotypes and prejudice in their work. For example, evaluators often work with data organized by cultural categories. The choices evaluators make in working with these data can affect prejudice and discrimination attached to such categories. To challenge stereotypes, it is necessary to recognize the diversity within groupings and remember that cultural categories are fluid. Culturally competent evaluators are also aware of marginalization. Understanding the experience of being devalued, marginalized, or subordinate is critical to responsible use of evaluative power. Evaluators who represent the values and standards of marginalized stakeholders use their power to promote equality and self-determination. Next, we're going to take a look at language. The next essential practice for engaging diverse populations in evaluation is to eliminate bias in our language. Words matter, and evaluators and project leaders must be cognizant of the language that they use throughout their projects, especially when dealing with culturally diverse populations. This includes, but is not limited to, the emails that we send, proposals that we develop and contribute to, survey design, interview and focus group protocols, and our reporting. I'd like to share with you a common example of bias in language that we at NYSER have dealt with. Recently, we have had discussions regarding the use of they as a singular pronoun in our writing, specifically in reporting. This has stemmed from an obligation to maintain confidentiality among participants in our work. However, divulging the participant's gender based on pronouns may place this confidentiality at risk. So we turned to the literature and began to explore ways to address this issue. While we typically refer to the American Psychological Association's 6th edition manual for direction in our writing as evaluators and social scientists, we also compared this to Merriam-Webster and Oxford dictionaries. The APA 6th edition made 4 overall suggestions. 1, make the sentence plural. Rewrite the sentence and replace with an article. Rewrite the sentence and drop the pronoun, or combine pronouns in the form of he/she. However, we felt that rewriting to remove or edit the sentence to not include the pronoun was skirting the issue, and that combining he and she pronouns made assumptions regarding gender identity. The Webster Dictionary suggests using the plural pronouns where the writer thinks it sounds best, and using singular pronouns where the writer thinks it sounds best. And finally, the Oxford Dictionary suggests that the singular form of they can be used, but does not recommend this approach in formal contexts. At NYSER, we have decided to use the singular version of they, them, and theirs in our writing and reporting. While there are currently no uniform standards to address this particular issue, we do recommend thinking about these issues with your collaborators and evaluators, and discuss how your project will help eliminate bias in language. I would like to point out, however, that all 3 sources mentioned agree that the use of they, them, and theirs is most appropriate for individuals who prefer a gender-neutral pronoun. The next essential practice is to employ culturally appropriate options in our evaluation work, such as maintain an awareness of the populations in which we are evaluating and working. Also, use data collection, analyses, and reporting techniques that align with our needs in working with these culturally diverse populations. Some tips to help employ culturally appropriate options are: ensure that members of the evaluation team collectively demonstrate cultural competence in the context for each evaluation. Select or create data collection instruments that have been or will be vetted for the use with the population of interest. Use intermediaries to assist with collecting data from persons whose participation would otherwise be limited by language, abilities, or factors such as familiarity or trust. And finally, engage and consult with those groups who are the focus of the evaluation and the analysis interpretation of data to address multiple audience perspectives. The final essential practice that we will discuss today is to be aware of your personal biases. It is essential to have a significant relationship with the people who are involved in the activity being evaluated. This means developing and establishing significant relationships and doing so for its own sake rather than merely as a device to establish cultural responsiveness. In order to have any type of meaningful relationship, it is important to first have a good sense of self, knowing your values, biases, and worldview, and to be open to any differences in those attitudes and beliefs you may encounter in others. Some tips to help you be more aware of and to make adjustments for your personal biases are to listen carefully, check your privilege, be respectful, and finally, it is imperative that you reserve judgment and risk making respectful mistakes. Respectful mistakes are misunderstandings based in honest interest and founded in honest positive regard for the other persons. Respectful mistakes are okay to make. Today, we have talked extensively about various best practices to engage diverse populations in evaluation and being culturally competent. Some of the key takeaways from today's presentation are: understand what both culture and cultural competency are. Acknowledge the complexity of cultural identity. Recognize the dynamics of power. Recognize and eliminate bias in language. Employ culturally appropriate options. Be aware of personal biases.
Well, thank you, Kevin. That was excellent information to get our audience started and thinking about how to engage diverse populations in our work. We've shared a lot of information with you in a short time, and at this point, we'd like to give you the opportunity to ask questions and share any comments you may have. So Lou has a couple of questions in the chat box, and he's going to share them with us. And if you haven't entered your questions yet, please feel free to enter them now, and we will address them.
So first of all, I wanted to point out that the National Science Foundation has created a video on inherent bias that is used now at every panel review. So that when you go to the National Science Foundation, or if you do this at distance, you are required to go through this and to then have a discussion about inherent biases. My first question that I'm going to ask is, what sort of methods do you recommend, aside from perhaps looking at what the National Science Foundation or other agencies might have, in order to assure that all involved in an evaluation process are aware of these issues? Are there resources in particular that you might recommend in that regard?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for the question, Lou. The American Evaluation Association has some guiding principles that are a great place to start. They also have a statement on cultural competence and evaluation, where a lot of these essential practices come from and things like that. There is also an NSF user-friendly handbook for project evaluation, and Chapter 7 of that book has a guide to conducting culturally responsive evaluations as well. And when we post this and make this available, we'll include a list of resources for everybody.
Oh, great. So thank you, Kevin, for reminding us to point out that this will all be posted. And now I have a question that comes in about the sort of source of the theoretical framework that was displayed. So the question is, what where are the sources for this in the process of defining culture and defining cultural competency. In other words, where this definition of culture that's displayed here. I think that's what the question referred to.
Yes, this came from, we have a link that actually has information on this that we are going to provide as well. But it came from study healthandculture.com, and we will provide that as a resource for everybody, and has some really great information on culture and how to assess that in your program and how to address cultural competency.
Okay. Then in the comments that you made, when you use the word may impact, the implication early on, I think this was before you talked about biases, the implication was that you're stating that some people don't have biases. And obviously that's not the case. Everyone has biases. And I think you may have used the term polite, and that's culturally defined too. So I think this question is, how do we ensure that our inherent biases are accounted for? We talked about that at the end a bit. Is there anything else that you'd like to say about that?
I'll chime in here for Kevin, get him off the hook for a second. I would say, just from being in the field of evaluation and practicing with a lot of diverse populations, is there's a lot of self-reflection that needs to go on with any project that you're getting involved with, and especially if you're talking about populations that are different from you. And you need to consider what your position is. So, are your culture and beliefs different from the culture and beliefs of the population that you're dealing with, or populations that you're dealing with? And how does your worldview, how could it potentially impact the way that you are interacting with these participants? So that's one piece of advice that I would give from just being in the field. So we do a lot of work, for instance, with first generation rural Appalachian college students, and there's a whole set of values and attitudes that come from being in that culture. There are fundamental assumptions and beliefs, and then behaviors that stem from that. For instance, one of the things that we deal with is oftentimes, if you're first generation, there's a family issue where the students are feeling like they're being pulled back to home to work, and their parents aren't super supportive of them going to college in the first place. So when you're thinking about evaluating their experience coming to a four-year university, you really need to consider that, while they may really want to be here and they may want to attend a four-year university, they may have this pull back from home, and we need to attend to that also. And we're talking about, are students doing well? Are they adapting well? There may be something that we're not seeing in the actual school environment that's going on, and that's part of understanding the culture of the population that you're dealing with.
So since this came in just in response to your comment, I'm going to state it, but there's another question after this. The underlying distrust of institutions that you're referring to has a real cause, in that many marginalized groups have distrust like that, and there's a real reason for that distrust.
Yes, that is a good point.
Yes.
Is there
okay.
a question associated with
I'm not sure that there's a question. I think there's a comment that what involving marginalized groups is a challenging component of evaluation.
Yes, it is. And oftentimes too, when you're talking about distrust of institutions, right? So we see this a lot, for instance, when we're a university-based evaluation entity, and you're talking about going into, for instance, a low SES school district, and they see you as coming in top down, you're the big university, and you're coming in to tell us what we're doing right and what we're doing wrong. And there again, you have to check your privilege and where you're coming from, and think about the perspective of the stakeholders that you're dealing with and how they may be viewing you as coming in. And a lot of that in that situation is earning trust and letting people know that you understand where they're coming from and you understand the struggles that they're going through, and that you're there to help, and you want to help them with whatever intervention it is that you're evaluating or implementing if you happen to be a project leader, and developing that relationship with people and letting them understand that you understand them is a really key element to cultural competency.
And there's a response on that indeed stepping out of that dominant position is extremely difficult to do. Many times you will never get their trust, and you may have to accept that.
Yes, and I actually experienced this years ago in my first evaluation position. I was going into school systems all across the state, and I was quite young to be evaluating some of these teachers who had been in the field for quite a bit longer than I had. And some of them, there was no way for them to think that I could know anything more than they did about what they were trying to do. And in many ways I didn't, but I did understand the program that we were evaluating. There was a point of acceptance of, okay, this is where you are and this is where I am. And this is what I'm trying to get done. And let's try to work together. I'm not trying to tell you what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong, but I am here to try to help you. But being, and that I guess was in some sense a cultural issue, because my age was a factor at that point, and a lot of the older teachers didn't want me coming in and being their evaluator, quote unquote. And we did just sort of have to come to an agreement that, this is what I'm here for, this is what you're here for, we're trying to work together, and let's move forward from here.
So the comment in response to that is that humility is required as an evaluator. And I don't know if there's a formal course on how to not have what we call hubris, thinking that you know more than others without understanding where they're coming from. There's a couple of other questions here. And so I'm going to, unless Kevin has something else to say on this particular issue, I'm going to move on to the next.
No, I think Pam did a great job explaining that.
So this one is in some sense related to that discussion. Do you have suggestions for negotiating the ever-present conflict between including representatives of a community in designing tools and evaluating data and tokenizing individuals by asking them to serve as representatives for their group?
That's a tough one. So we see that a lot. I would say, do we have recommendations for that? I mean, so it is true that oftentimes when you're working in a certain population and there are people that are representative of an underrepresented minority group that you're working with, and that they're good, they get picked on a lot to ask for their feedback. What I would say to that is, open the invitation to more than just those people that are superstars that are going to be easy to work with. A lot of times people won't volunteer. So you could, reach out to different people in the population that you're trying to work with, and actively try to bring in more people that represent that population instead of just those specific superstars that keep being asked. And what I'm going to hear in my mind, Lou, is thinking about at NIMBUS, our parent institute, the National Institute for Mathematical and Biological Synthesis. We have a very strong emphasis on diversity in a lot of the research groups that we host here. And oftentimes in certain fields, such as mathematics, there are a few female superstars that get asked often to be part of the group. We do try to encourage people to reach out to others, females and other minorities in mathematics as an example. But it is true that certain people do get picked often because they are the ones that know what you're doing, and they're easy to work with. And so my advice would be to really make a concerted effort to reach out to others in the community and try to get them involved.
So actually, that goes exactly along with the suggestion from one of the chat participants, which is what needs to be done is to hire more people from underrepresented groups. That gives you a much larger pool, and that could include people for whom English is not the first language, people of color, et cetera. And if your organization is diverse, then you may not have the same level of difficulty in having individuals sort of view themselves as being a token representative from a particular group. That's an excellent point. And it goes along with another question that we may not be able to answer, but it's an interesting question. Within Includes, or NSF in general, and the goal of broadening participation, is there a push or activity to include underrepresented populations as evaluators?
Not that I am aware of that there is a push for that. I certainly think that it is welcomed by NSF. I know, for instance, female-led entities are looked upon favorably as far as evaluation work goes. There are evaluators of all, of gender identity and racial and ethnic backgrounds. But as far as I know, and Lou, you could chime in here too, I don't know of any actual concerted effort to bring in minority evaluators.
I think that the National Science Foundation as an organization has a general principle, and here I can't speak for the foundation. I'm just speaking as an individual. I have to be careful about that. Has clearly an emphasis on broadening participation across every aspect of the science and research initiatives across the United States. And that would certainly include evaluation. With regard to any particular policy on, for example, requiring hiring evaluators of different backgrounds, I'm unaware of anything like that. There certainly are, however, within the National Science Foundation, as with all government agencies, opportunities for small business awards. I call it SBIRs and STTRs. And within that group, my understanding is that there are, in the evaluation of proposals from those, taking into account a variety of aspects of who is proposing, including whether or not the small business is organized through individuals who are from traditionally underrepresented groups. So that's my feeling about that. And here's a comment. As the majority-minority flip is soon approaching, dropping the use of the word minorities is recommended. And I certainly understand that. And language matters.
Right. I was going to say that gets back to what Kevin was talking about language mattering and biases in language. And culture is ever evolving, and that's a very good point about using the majority minority dichotomy there. And I agree with you that probably will be dropped from our language soon.
There was another comment about the use of the plural they, that someone wrote yay when you said that, and I think, did they say that AP has moved to this as well? AP meaning Associated Press?
I'm not sure.
That would be
awesome.
Yes. So those are the questions that I see here so far. I don't know if we have other ones that have come up on. No. Okay. Oh, it's APA style. Okay.
Oh yes. Yep.
Okay. Yes. And I think that's the set of questions that we have. So I know you have some additional comments at the very end of this.
Scoot
So
back down to
we'll
there.
move back to
Excuse
the
us
end
as
of
we
this.
rush back through to the
as
end.
she's doing that, if you have a last minute question or comment, please feel free to send it in.
All right.
Um,
Here we are at the
oh,
end.
here's something. Okay. This is, I'm gonna have to read this, okay? It's fairly long. This is a very broad, this webinar is a very broad overview of culture and cultural competency. Is there something more in depth that you offer to participants, such as trainings, webinars, workshops, that can help them recognize their implicit bias and how it impedes not only evaluation, but all aspects of program? That would include mentoring, student success. I think additional resources pointing to key resources available to include participants to follow up on this broad overview is necessary to be more effective in making change. So are you aware of some particular, I mean, obviously we're going to have a link to some of these, but.
I would say, I mean, our best area for professional development and evaluation in general has always been the American Evaluation Association. And you will find, if you go to their website, eval.org, there are all kinds of resources. There's a topical interest group on cultural competence and evaluation. There are webinars that you can view. There are things they call coffee breaks. They're 15-minute webinars. There are e-trainings. There are courses. So I think that if you're looking for further in-depth professional development on this, I would say going to AEA and perusing the website there and just searching in there for cultural competence and looking for the variety of different types of professional development that's offered there. And of course, the in-person conference is always a great resource. There are a lot of presentations on this topic. There are often workshops that are offered at the beginning and end of the conference on this topic. So that would be where I would go. Kevin, do you have any other suggestions?
Yeah, I think that AEA is a great resource. Like she said, there are lots of topical interest groups. So there's ones on cultural competency. There's ones specifically for LGBT populations and things like that. There's also a great recommendation from one of the members in the chat box that recommends WPC. So there's definitely a lot of resources available, and like I said, we'll provide a list of those, and NSF also has a chapter in their handbook on conducting culturally responsive evaluation as well.
You might say what WPC stands for. I see it.
That was provided by one of our attendees.
Yeah, on the chat. So maybe that person, White Privilege Conference.
Oh.
Okay, that was one I was not aware of. And we're having some things added to the chat, particularly the AEA, eval.org is one. And we should also mention that a group that is heavily used in the includes process is a product of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. That's AAAS.org is their website. But within that is a major project called Trellis, Trellis. Trellis has, among other things, it has many, many groups, but it has a cultural diversity group within it. And that is associated particularly with how to enhance cultural diversity, not just in includes endeavors, but in other science endeavors as well. And AAAS has a very long history of carrying out activities to broaden participation in science, and they have a lot of resources available there. We have the Trellis group listed, has just been posted to the chat. Okay, and then let's see what's going on now in Grand Rapids. Oh,
That's
that must be the White
Privilege
Conference is going on right
interesting. Now. We'll have to take a look at that. Thank you, Jennifer, for that recommendation. Interesting.
So I think we have covered most of the items that came up. I'm just looking here to make sure. Somebody talks about an intersectional approach. That's the, well, I assume that's the White People's Conference. Okay. And that looks like it for now. So.
All right. Well, thank you. And as always, we've enjoyed this end of webinar conversation with everyone. We always get great questions and start good conversations. I'm going to leave you with just a couple of pieces of information. If we've piqued your interest today and you want to learn a little more, you can visit our Includes conference website, which you can see at the top of the screen here. And we'll be posting registration links for our upcoming webinars. Actually, the registration links are already there for the next 2 webinars. So if you go to the site, you can sign up for the next 2 that we have there. The next one is May 3rd, Qualitative Data and Culturally Rich Evaluations. It says for NSF Includes projects, but of course it's applicable across any STEM broadening participation projects. And then June 7th, we'll be having strategies for measuring broader impact. So that's a big topic across, especially in NSF, but across all types of projects. We'd ask you to please visit the NYSER website and follow us on Facebook and Twitter for real-time evaluation information. And if you're so inclined to tweet about today's experience, our Twitter hashtag is #NYSEREval. And finally, contact us. Kevin and I are available to answer questions about today's webinar, and the whole NYSER team is available for collaboration on future STEM education projects if you're interested. As a reminder, we'll send an email with a link to our presentation today. And please also look for an evaluation survey about the webinar because we do value your feedback. And with that, well, thank you.